It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'll be your host this morning. And we're going to cover a range of topics. I'm going to start with the issues surrounding Obamacare because they are really problematic in a number of areas. First off, we're going to hit on this issue of the Navigators, which are being hired to, help you wend your way through the Obamacare nightmare. And I don't think most Americans understand the depth of how deep this thing goes and how complicated it will be for average Americans to even sign up for this. Now, you know, we've been promoting and pushing the idea that basically what we're going to do is refuse to sign up at all. But the Department of Health and Human Services is making it theoretically easier for people to navigate through the labyrinthian requirements of signing up by hiring these so-called navigators. Now, these people were originally slated to be run with background checks and to be fingerprinted because the issue is that they're going to have such extensive information and access to your personal financial and healthcare information that they had to be assured that these people weren't identity thieves, that they weren't, scammers and artists and con men. And, of course, now the HHS has withdrawn that because of time constraints. They're so close to the October 1st deadline, and they don't have anything in play here to really get this thing off the ground. And so what they're now doing is promoting the idea that the right approach is to basically let anybody be a navigator. And these are going to, of course, be federal employees now, right? So these are people not only who will help you theoretically navigate the labyrinthian process, but to make matters worse, there are other people who will be actually assisting those navigators. And none of those people are subjected to any kind of review as to who they are, what their past is, and so forth and so on. Now, they're going to interact and work hand in hand with consumers around the nation to try to walk them through the process of becoming a signed-up Obamacare member, shall we say, a member of these exchanges. And when they have access to all of your data, they're going to have access to your entire medical history. And because of the fact that the data hub requires that you provide all of your financial history as well, including tax return information, your Social Security information is going to be in there. And they have no assurances at this point, not only that the DataCare hub itself is safe, and these are from the litany of contractors and federal employees and the agencies themselves who are going to get this data, and hackers who can tap into the system to draw this data off. But more importantly now they're refusing to run background checks and fingerprint those people who are actually going to be interacting with you on a one-on-one basis. So if they've previously been convicted of, say, identity theft or grand theft or some kind of fraud or something like that before, you'll never know. Isn't that amazing? In other words, how are we to ever know that the person we're talking to is not basically taking all of the information that we're providing to them and then, in turn, selling that off to someone else? Now, the Attorney General for Florida, a woman by the name of Pam Bondi, and if you recall, she was pretty instrumental in filing the initial lawsuit against Obamacare that went to the Supreme Court. And she's saying that, and she's actually at this point, because of the time frame associated with this, she has been arguing that new hires under the Obamacare project and HHS in general will threaten the private information of people trying to. She's whistleblowing, basically. And she and a dozen other Republican state attorney generals sent HHS Kathleen Sebelius a letter calling her attention to this privacy issue and asking her to implement more stringent policy requirements and safeguards. Now, they've given her until August 28th to respond, which is 9 days away. Now, the real problem here, of course, is that even if HHS does come back and say, sure, we're going to do something more strict, that doesn't seal the problem. First of all, we have to assume that we can trust that. And to be candid, at this point in time, if anything that you hear from the federal government at this stage in the game really cannot and should not be openly trusted. I mean, we've seen so much finagling and lying that, you know, we don't really have an obligation at this point to believe anything that they say. But secondarily, even if they do implement a change, will that change be a paper change, or will it be a meaningful limitation on what, can and cannot be done by these people? So, and what kind of information access they have. And then the other area that these attorney generals, quite frankly, have forgotten to talk about is the whole data hub security problem that exists. Because with this data security violation, there is no assurance that hackers won't be able to gain access to this system and systematically steal the information on what, for all intents and purposes, this is the vast majority of America. Everyone is going to be required to sign up. So let's assume, for argument's sake, that you have 2/3 of the country. That's 200 million people. I mean, all they've got to do is wait a month or two, maybe 3 months, and then pop open a line and siphon all of that information off. And they've got enough information to, for all intents and purposes, to completely crash our financial system. How can they do that, you ask? Well, I'm going to make it real simple. If you violate the security of and the private identity of 200 million Americans and go out and apply for credit in their name, or go out there and gain access to their bank accounts and what have you by surreptitious and devious means, you will collapse the entire American financial system. And for all we know, these could be foreign agents doing this as well. In other words, it could be a state-sponsored agency like North Korea, or it could be China, or it could be a terrorist organization or an extremist organization. Pick anyone you want, but I mean, Al-Qaeda comes to mind. Or it could just be a well-organized ring of identity thieves in the United States of America who seek to, for all intents and purposes, replicate American identities. And then a couple of things can happen. One, they could open up the floodgates of immigration by making and obtaining passports and identification that they could then sell on the black market to illegals. Secondarily, they can go out and apply for credit in your name, go out and apply for a mortgage in your name for a second mortgage on your home, a credit line. They can gain access to your bank accounts through surreptitious means, draining you of your savings, gaining access to your 401k and moving it offshore or into another account. I mean, look, the scenarios are as broad and as wide as your imagination. And so what we need to recognize is that no matter what we do, this system has got the level of security of Swiss cheese. Now, to make matters worse, and I'm going to cover this in our second, I'm going to actually make this 2 segments out of the 4, because this Obamacare thing is so close to us that we really need to understand the full depth and depravity of this issue. But what we also need to recognize is that this is not only subtly, but immediately now destroying the job market in the United States of America. And we're going to touch more on that in our next segment. So, where we stand right now is that the states that have organized this, and there's a group of them. There's 12, or actually 13 if you count Bondi from Florida. But they're West Virginia, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Kansas, Louisiana, Michigan, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Texas. 2 states that are notably missing there are Arkansas and Missouristan. Now, why are those two states missing? Well, for starters, our Attorney General in the state of Missouri is a leftist Democrat who works under the administration of our governor, who's also a leftist. And the real problem here is that they don't want to stand up and fight, even though the state of Missouri has repeatedly passed limitations on the implementation of Obamacare. And so what we have are states that are unwilling to actually protect their citizenry in the face of a clear and imminent exigent threat. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is really a tragedy. In other words, you can't look to the federal government to protect you, and you can't look to your own state to protect you. So who is going to protect us? Who's speaking for us? Who's protecting you? Who's protecting your financial information, your health care information? Clearly, the federal government, because this is their program, has no intention of protecting your privacy. In fact, they're working double time to abuse it. So if they are working double time to abuse it, and your state, in this case the state of Missouri and Arkansas, are unwilling to step up and defend their residents and their electorate and their citizens, then who is left for us? No one. And that is the tragedy. Not a single person, not a single entity can step up and defend the residents and the citizens of the United States of America from the implementation of perhaps the government's largest data gathering collection system that has ever been invented. I got to tell you, this is really a tragedy. It shows us the level of collapse that our republic has gone through in the past 5 years. In the past 25 years, literally, but immediately, I mean, the slide is, we've been on a slow, long, graduated decline for years now, for decades. And it's not just limited to 25 years, folks. It's been the last 100. I mean, basically, you can figure from 1912, when they instituted the Federal Reserve and the income tax and all the rest of this stuff, that the progressives got their way. They got their foot in the door. They got the power, the scepter, and they have been basically raining tyranny upon us ever since, but in small, graduated doses. Now, however, under the last 5 or 6 years since the Obama administration has taken over, we have literally fallen into a steeply inclined slide into tyranny. And the amount of data that is being gathered and built in dossiers on every American citizen between the Obamacare mandated hub and the NSA and some of these other programs that are out there should really alert everyone to the fact that we are literally so far outside of the federal government's authorized boundaries that at this stage in the game, I'm not sure that there's any salvaging of where we stand for the safety and security of Americans. We are now under a tyrannical dictatorship that is being promulgated upon us, not only by our own federal government, but by our state governments as well. How do I say that? Well, when you have a totalitarian regime, they pass laws that either prefer and aggrandize the party in leadership, or they have capitulated to corporate interests. And in the case of the United States of America, the vast majority of states and the federal government have capitulated to both. In other words, we live in a corporatocracy, which is our representatives, or alleged representatives in Congress, are completely owned by corporate interests and or their own personal agendas. The administration is actively working to turn our nation from a Republican or a Democratic republic or a Republican democracy into a fascist tyranny state of terror that they rule. I'm not blowing smoke when I talk about this, folks. I mean, the evidence is everywhere in front of us. All we really need to do is look, listen, watch, and understand. And we have to stop, pretending that what they're really about is not so megalomaniacal. It really, truly is. And when we look at the danger that they're putting us in, you know, just on this navigation thing alone, they are going to hire literally tens of thousands of navigators. And by the way, the source where they're obtaining them are all of these leftist organizations that are friends of the administration. In other words, it's the Acorns of the world and that ilk. And so when we talk about the source of the people, and then we talk about the fact that no one's actually looking at them to see what have they been involved in, or what do they, you know, what is their function, we have to recognize that this administration is doing nothing to protect us as the citizenry from a massive data theft that will be used against the people of the United States of America. And government's first job, its only job, is to protect its citizenry. What we now are looking at here is a gathering and a collection of our information so that it can be used against us by third-party members of the gang, if you will. And I find that reprehensible. You know, I've talked before about this new book out by Mark Levin and how some of this stuff can be changed. I've ordered the book. I don't have it yet, but I've ordered it because I want to study it. And I want to look at what some of the options are for us here, because the proposal that Levin has laid out is exceedingly valuable to us in a couple of areas. One, I think that one of the most important areas is that it gives us hope. It gives us hope that we will have a way to defeat and defend ourselves from this overreach, whether it be Obamacare, whether it be the NSA surveillance, the IRS, you know, targeting enemies of the administration, whether it be Fast and Furious, Benghazi, you know, whether it be just the overall abusive reach of agencies and organizations like the EPA, the FDA, and, you know, I mean, I can go on and on and on. That three-letter alphabet list is so long, it fills legal pads. So we may have some alternatives here, and without studying it, although Levin is a fine attorney and he's a fine constitutional mind, and so I don't doubt that what he's talking about will certainly, you know, rack up some points in terms of our ability to have weaponry that we can fight with or fight back against. But when we look at the alternatives to us here, there really aren't very many. I mean, we're so far down the road at this point that unless we begin to take some decisive action at once, I don't really think that. And in the case of Obamacare, the decisive action is clear. The decisive action is clear in that regard because what we're saying is simply refuse to participate. If you want to break the back of Obamacare, we have to stop thinking that we're going to get some help from Congress, because they have completely and obviously sold themselves down the river and us with it. And we know that for a fact because they did that just in order to pass the bill. Forget actually how to defend us from its implementation. They sold us down the river for a sweetheart deal, for a funding project. You know, that guy Stupak there cut a deal based on the fact that Obamacare would never implement abortion money. They're doing it anyway. They made a promise to that scumbag on the Cornhusker deal. You know, I mean, look, they betrayed us in the actual passage of the bill, and now they're betraying us in the implementation of the bill. And so, really, it's got to come down to at some point we are able to hold the line here. But we're going to have to do so, you know, by some sort of radical method that is going to take a major, unique approach to stopping the problem. Now, there's really two ways that we can repeal Obamacare. Since we don't have any congressional representation here that we can verifiably trust, then the right way for us to do that is simply to refuse to sign up. By refusing to sign up, we will, for all intents and purposes, be blocking the implementation of that which we know to be probably the worst law that has been fostered on Americans since the Federal Reserve Act. And I can't stress strongly enough, there's a whole bunch of moves out there, and you'll see we've posted them up on our Facebook page and some other areas, to burn your Obamacare card. And I would like to see a national movement like burning the draft card was back in the 60s, where people say, I'm opting out. I'm pledging that I'm going to burn my Obamacare card. I will not do this. I will not play. I'm not going to participate. And here's the deal. If you recognize the value of, actually there's been numbers floated out there that as little as 3 million people could bring this thing to its knees. Now, 3 million people is really a drop in the bucket. And we're going to talk in the next segment about how the Obamacare project has missed so many of its deadlines that at this point we can't even really implement it, because the thing is being, implemented in such a half-baked and foolish fashion. We really don't even have the understanding that or any confidence level that it can even be implemented. But if we couple that with 100% failure to participate, then we've actually effectively repealed it ourselves as citizens, as a grassroots effort. And that is what I'm encouraging you to do today. Simply refuse to participate. Say no. There won't be any navigator on my phone trying to wend my way through this. In fact, do anything and everything in your power to thwart this law. In other words, as far as I'm concerned, let's get Obamacare navigators on the phone and give them information that, or just eat up their time. In other words, let's actively work, not just passively by refusing to participate, but let's actively work against the project. Get them on the phone, ask them zillions of questions, keep them on the phone as long as you can. Don't allow them to begin to enter your information. Just stall. We can defeat this, but it's going to take massive civil disobedience on the part of the American people, and especially those who stand to, who are effectively paying for Obamacare. Remember that the goal here is to tie up the youth in America so that their income is funding the Obamacare projects for those who are less income inclined and or income handicapped, if you will, and or to help pay the bills for the older people who require more health care. So if the youth in America says, I don't care what you do, I'm just not signing up. If the youth in America does what the youth in America did in the 60s regarding the Vietnam War and their draft cards, we got a plan of action, folks. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, if you're watching us streaming live on our website, and I know there's plenty of you out there doing that, when I take this break, simply click the restart button, because I got to take a pause in the middle to break it up for commercials and YouTube postings. So please stick with us. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about how far down the road of failure this thing actually is, and how it's not even ready for primetime implementation. We'll be back in just a second. You're listening to America's Voice Now.